In 2001, at the age of 81, she was arrested protesting the U.S. military's bombing of the Puerto Rican island of Vieques. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today with news from Afghanistan. On Sunday, the Netherlands became the first NATO country to withdraw all its troops from Afghanistan, ending a 4-year military presence that brought down a Dutch government. Canada and Poland have also pledged to pull all their troops out of Afghanistan in the next 2 years. There were less than 2,000 Dutch soldiers in Afghanistan. Canada and Poland have just over 2,500 troops in the country. Meanwhile, American forces in Afghanistan are expected to reach 100,000 by next month. Although President Obama has pledged to begin withdrawing U.S. troops in July 2011, Defense Secretary Robert Gates told ABC's This Week broadcast Sunday that only a small number of troops would leave next year.
I think we need to re-emphasize the message that we are not leaving Afghanistan in July of 2011. We are beginning a transition process and a thinning of our ranks that will, and the pace will depend on the conditions on the ground. The President has been very clear about that. Again, July 2011 is not the end. It is the beginning of a transition.
July was the deadliest month for the U.S. military in Afghanistan, with 66 deaths. But it was also a devastating month for many Afghans, with more than 270 civilians killed and some 600 wounded. 200 people marched through Kabul Sunday to protest the deaths of some 45 civilians in a NATO rocket attack on Helmand province the previous week.
We gathered here to condemn the brutal action of America. Tens of Afghan civilians get killed by Americans every day, mostly women. Without recognizing whether they are Taliban or not, they get killed.
Our demands are for NATO and the Americans to leave our country as soon as possible. We Afghans must come together to choose our path and make the destiny of Afghanistan. We must end this deadlock.
Well, as American military operations in Afghanistan continue to escalate, I'm joined here in New York by retired U.S. Army Colonel, historian, and best-selling author Andrew Bacevich. He's a professor of international relations and history at Boston University and the author of The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism. His latest book, just out this week, is called Washington Rules: America's Path to Permanent War. Andrew Bacevich, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
Well, you've heard a series of stunning and horrifying figures, because any civilian killed is a horrifying situation. What do you think needs to happen in Afghanistan right now?
In a sense, I think, although that's the question that everybody focuses on, I've come to believe it's really the wrong question. And it's the wrong question in the sense that it's important to step back and try to take in a larger view. And the larger question, I think, is what exactly is the threat that the United States faces from these radical, violent Islamists, and what strategy should the United States pursue in order to deal with that threat? The strategy that the Bush administration set out on in the immediate wake of 9/11 was based on the assumption that American military power was so overpowering that we would be able to invade and occupy and transform societies, thereby, they thought, removing the conditions that produces anti-American violence. Well, we've given that effort roughly a 9-year experiment now, and it hasn't worked. Despite the fact that we have invested probably trillions of dollars in our efforts to transform Iraq and Afghanistan. So the prior question is not so much what to do about Afghanistan, is what ought to be the basis for a sound American strategy. And then once we have conceived of that strategy, then you ask the question, well then, how does Afghanistan fit within that strategy?
So what do you think that strategy should look like?
I think that I do believe there is a threat to the United States. 9/11 happened. There are people who want to launch attacks against the United States. I don't believe it's an existential threat. This notion that we face something called Islamofascism, this notion that Al-Qaeda has the capacity to establish some new caliphate extending across the Islamic world, that's absurd. The threat is real. The threat is limited. And I think that we should see the threat as akin to an international criminal conspiracy. And the best way to deal with an international criminal conspiracy is through an international police effort, collaborating with allies who have an interest in preventing terrorist attacks and address the problem that way, much as I think the international community attempts to address the problem of the mafia. And that doesn't involve occupying, invading countries, believing that you can somehow transform them.
I wanted to go back to a speech of President Obama. He gave it last December when he announced the United States would send an additional 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. This is a part of his justification for escalating the war. He gave the speech at West Point on December 1st.
More than any other nation, the United States of America has underwritten global security for over 6 decades. A time that, for all its problems, has seen walls come down and markets open and billions lifted from poverty, unparalleled scientific progress and advancing frontiers of human liberty. For unlike the great powers of old, we have not sought world domination. Our union was founded in resistance to oppression. We do not seek to occupy other nations. We will not claim another nation's resources or target other peoples because their faith or ethnicity is different from ours. What we have fought for, what we continue to fight for, is a better future for our children and grandchildren, and we believe that their lives will be better if others' peoples, children and grandchildren, can live in freedom and access opportunity.
President Obama justifying the escalation of war. Professor Bacevich,
well, it's a very sanitized version of American history that I imagine many Americans find agreeable, but it does tremendous violence to the actual facts of our post-World War II history. I mean, we are not an imperial nation in the sense that Great Britain or France, nations like that were once imperial nations. But we are imperial. We wish to dominate. We wish to ensure that norms that work to the advantage or perceived to work to the advantage of the United States prevail across the world. And we are, I think, uniquely in this moment determined to rely on military power to enforce those norms. And the most important thing, I think, to realize about that notion that I just described is it's not working. I mean, we're bankrupting the country. We are headed towards, I think, ever greater, more difficult economic times that will result in us failing in our most fundamental obligation laid out in the preamble of the Constitution, which is to provide the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. The path on which we have embarked and in which we continue to pursue is very much at odds with what the founding purpose of this republic was supposed to be.
Our guest is Andrew Bacevich, Professor of History and International Relations at Boston University, retired colonel, Vietnam War vet, author of, well, the book that's coming out this week, Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War. We'll be back with him in a minute.